Hello, amazing parents. I had a really good question come in actually from another practitioner who's inside the Mindful Movement Program. And I just wanted to do a little quick video because I thought it was a good setup for, what's the initial assessment that I do with almost all of the kids that come into my office or I see like online. What is the thought process? Because I know a few parents have reached out and been like, the thought process of how to connect all of these pieces is kind of what binds it all together and what connects it for you guys as parents and practitioners. So we'll just imagine, so the practitioner has a little girl coming in. I think she's about 4 years old. She had failure to thrive as an infant, couldn't really eat orally very well, et cetera, et cetera. So she's about 4. She still has, she's very wiggly and engaged, which is fantastic because that tells me that she has self-initiated movements, which that's one thing I'll talk about, like what I look for in kids is like those self-initiated movements. And that's kind of what you should keep in the forefront of your mind all the time is like, how can I create the space to have them self-initiate the movements, and I'm going to use my fingers and hands to kind of make the connections for them, to further their connections. So I'll get in more depth about it, but if they have self-initiated movements to look and to reach, but the bottom half of their body is still, which is quite common for a lot of our kids, I'm going to use that self-initiated motivation for them to look and reach for something. And I'm going to use my hands to highlight to their brain that, hey, while you're reaching and looking and reaching at something interesting that they find interesting, I'm going to use my hands to suggest maybe you have a pelvis that can move as well. Maybe you have a leg that can push against something to help you get to that thing that you want to get to, right? So I'm using that self-initiated movement and their own internal motivation to kind of start the process. And I'm going to follow behind with a few little suggestions and little highlights to their brain. So hopefully that puts it into some kind of context kind of for you. And most kids who are still struggling with head control, who aren't quite sitting up independently yet, you can all kind of start in the same place. So if the child came in, I would immediately, if they're comfortable, put them on their back. That's the safest position for most kids' nervous systems. Occasionally get a child that's not comfortable on their back because of breathing issues or whatever's going on. Sometimes scoliosis too can not feel good. Or if they have spasticity in the legs and they're pulling their legs up, sometimes being on the back isn't their safest position. So in that case, I would just do it lying on their side or the most comfortable position for their unique nervous system. Start where they feel the safest. So, but if they're on their back, we'll just imagine that's the scenario. and for almost all kids, I will see how do they interact to my voice and to me visually. So I'll get really close to them and simply chat or sing a song or be a little silly, try to get their brain's attention to what I'm saying and like the audio part of it, but also my face, a bright smiling face. I'm going to go a little bit to the left and a little bit to the right, and I'm visually watching, are their eyes tracking me and is their head moving? And you'll notice most kids are really good to one side. They have a preferred side. We all have a preferred side. And it's just something to kind of file away in the back of your head. And we're going to work with where is movement. So what I'm looking for is like, where is movement the easiest for them? What direction is movement easiest for them? And where is movement easiest for them? So are they actually tracking with their eyes, or are they using their ears to track the sound? Like, so maybe visually they can't see very well if they have some sort of like CVI or whatever. Maybe they're using their hearing to track things, which is fine. So, but I'm going to file that away and I'm going to use that to my advantage later to create the space for them to continue to self-initiate movement. So I'm going to make it really, really easy for them to self-initiate movement, for them to want something. So whether they're visually attracted to something or audibly attracted to something, you can use that to your advantage. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. So I'm not going to I'm thinking of like, when I first meet them, I'm thinking of like, what is the easiest way to get self-initiated movement out of them? What is the easiest way to connect to them? So if it's visually, then do it visually. But if it's through your sound or a silly song or a bright flashing toy, then you do it that way. And then I want to see how do they move? How do they interact with that kind of that stimulation coming in, that sensory incoming information? How do they react? Are they turning their eyes? Are they turning their head? Are they reaching for me? So that would be like the next thing. The very first thing would be either they're responding by listening, or they're responding with their eyes, and then their head's turning. And then the second thing would be them reaching for me. Are they reaching for me? So I'm kind of going down the checklist of things that I'm looking for. Are they reaching for, if they are reaching for me, are they reaching for me with just one hand, or can they do both hands, right? So I might be singing a little song, having a little hand thing, maybe the Itsy Bitsy Spider. They're reaching for me. I'm touching their finger, getting them interested in, wiggling a finger, whatever, connecting with them somehow, having an interesting toy. Will they do it with one hand? Will they do it with the other hand? I don't know, right? So I'm going kind of down the checklist of things, and I'm visually watching as I'm doing this. I'm going a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. Is their chest moving? Are their arms moving? Is their pelvis moving? This is a really, really big hint right here, because sometimes you'll have the upper body participating more, and then the lower body not moving very much at all. So you're trying to find out, where do they have the most connections and where do they have the least amount of connections. So it depends on the child. Obviously, it's unique for every kid. Maybe it's like one side is different than the other side, right? So some kids initially learn to move by like throwing their arms across their chest, and that's how they learn how to roll. And they have they initiate movement from the chest area, and their legs just kind of follow. So that's one example that might be true. The other example is they're actually initiating all their movement by pushing through the legs and rolling. They're using their legs to lift up and roll to the side. So they're self-initiating movement, starting with the legs and the pelvis. So that's information that you file away in your brain. So when you go from left to right, where are they starting? Where are they self-initiating the movement? Is it their pelvis and legs, or is it their upper chest and arms? Okay, and then you kind of just work backwards. So you notice, what section of them are moving really well, really coordinated. Where are they initiating the movement from? It could be top up or bottom down, one side or the other side, and you find the side that is moving the most coordinated, that is doing most of the initiated movements, and you key on that, and you start connecting from the area that they're moving the best in. Okay, wherever that kind of happens to be, and then you start to filter out in and make those connections for them, or suggest those connections for them using your hands. So you're going to use your hands as like shining a little spotlight on the blank areas that they might have in the rest of their body, and helping them make those connections for them. So if they're really initiating, if they're on their back and they're following me to, as I'm above them, staring at them, making funny noises and faces. If they're watching me from side to side, this is a good thing if they can roll their head from one direction to the other. Maybe they can't go all the way to their right. Let's just say like this quadrant here is really super easy for them, and they actually are reaching with this hand. They don't have much awareness in this section here at all, and they're just kind of reaching and so initiating movement in this section here, but you don't see any movement in their pelvis. So in that case, I would spend a lot of my time exploring how this area here can start to move even better. How can you make this section here for them start to get really in depth and fine tune it? Can you play with more of their fingers? Can you bring their hands to this side of their face? Can you get their shoulder moving, their ribs on this side moving? Highlight, that these ribs here. So you get this side really, really engaged and moving and connected. And then you start to add in the other pieces that their brain hasn't fully mapped yet. Lost you. Okay, I think we're back. So in that case, if that was the child down here, and say this part of her was really, she was reaching with this hand and she was really engaged on this side, and we were kind of having a good time. She's touching my hair, we're laughing and giggling kind of on this side of her, but the rest of her is not quite online, it's not connected. Then I'm going to use my hands to highlight to her that, hey, you have ribs on this side that can come on this side, and we can go over here and over there. So I'm going to use my hands to shine spotlights to say, hey, you have ribs on this side. Hey, you have a shoulder blade on this side and a sternum that could come along for the ride. Hey, you have a pelvis that maybe if you turn as well, you can see me way over here. And maybe you have a leg here that maybe can push against the floor or roll with the pelvis to come on over here. So I'm kind of like, I'm feeling with my hands where she's the most movable, where she's the most engaged, and I'm centered in this section here, getting it really coordinated, and then I'm going to other parts of her body that are not as connected and making suggestions and saying, hey, what about this? What about this? What about that? What about those ribs? What about the pelvis? What about the leg? Oh, what about the foot? What if you put the foot up against my hand? What would happen? What would happen over here? So I'm making like these suggestions, but I'm keeping in the front of my mind that to keep her engaged in self-initiating the movement herself. Okay, so I'm not taking her pelvis and saying, hey, let's go over to this spot to look at that interesting thing. I'm just going to roll you over so we can do that. I'm waiting for her to engage with me or the object, whatever it is, right? Like being like, oh, look at the ball, roll over there. And she kind of takes a little look. I'm feeling with my hand. Oh, she took a little look. I can feel the force. I can feel the chain reaction of being like, oh, here's a little gentle reminder. Maybe you can move your pelvis too to see the ball even more clearly. Okay, hopefully that's helpful. And if you have questions about it, send it to me down below. Yeah, and that's just kind of, there's so much more involved in the thought process, but hopefully that gets you started, those beginning kind of stages of like this assessment of like, what am I thinking while I'm assessing a child, and, what am I thinking to create those connections, that kind of spider web of connections. I'm looking for, where does she have like the most body mapping, and where does she not, right? And I'm going to start where they're the most connected, and I'm going to kind of like cast a little spider web out from that place that she knows really well, building on self-initiated movements. Okay, it's a big concept, but I think it's one of the most important ones, right? So hopefully that's helpful in your little journey here. Definitely, if you have a child who's still, struggling to sit up and struggling with head control, take a look at the head control section and the independent sitting and even the rolling over. So those three like very beginning sections, take a look at those. Be really involved in being aware of like what they can do really well, and then making those connections with head control, specifically the head, spine, and pelvis connection. Okay, so kind of always have your hands somewhere on their head, spine. When they're in this position here, you can't have your hands on their spine, but I'm thinking of, as I'm touching their ribs, I'm actually talking to their spine. So that's why my hands are often on the chest or the ribs or the sternum. I'm actually talking to the other side of where my hands are. I'm actually talking to the spine, highlighting to the brain, the spine area. So definitely for like better head control, independent sitting, set them up for those connections between the head, the spine, and the pelvis. Those are kind of the main areas there. Okay, hopefully that's helpful, and we will see you in the next video. Okay, bye.